So main here is the component that gets rendered if we are logged in. And I actually have more than one component in this file. I have user links, nav, and main. Because those other two are so short, it's not even worth putting them in another file. But it was worth breaking them out into their own components. So user links, that's just the sign out button at the bottom. Unsurprisingly, it takes a method as a prop and assigns that to the onClick. Nav contains the logo, and it contains the new note button, which I didn't assign an onClick to the button. I put it inside a link from React Router. And then it includes the user links component and passes down the sign out function as a prop. Main renders nav, which in turn renders user links. Then it renders notes list. And it defines these routes. This is where we look for whether there's an ID, basically. If there's an ID as part of the route, then we render note form with a specific note. If there's not an ID, then we render it without a specific note. Yeah.
What's the difference between props and other props?
So let's look. So in our argument list here on main, we break out the sign out prop specifically. And then just like we did in private route, we take all the other props that were passed in and put in other props. That way we can make sure that we pass all of the props that we receive onto notes form. Because main is going to get a bunch of props that it doesn't actually need, but that notes form does need. Props, on the other hand, where does that come from? It's what's passed into the render function. So since you haven't talked about React Router render yet, yeah, you haven't seen this, but it's the router props. It's things like location and so on. I'm pretty sure. Let's look it up just to be sure. React Router 4. Render. Does this have a, yeah. This is it's 2016. That's not going to be 4. Okay, here's a trick. That's a tutorial. Why am I not immediately finding the actual documentation for React Router? Yeah, I forget that React Training is actually the name of the organization that made this. Yeah. Yeah. That takes me to the tutorial web. Thank you. All right. This is tiny. I'll find the right part of the docs and then I'll show you. Might be under. API, okay. Route, render function. Ah, dang it. Yeah. Dagnabbit. Route, render. Okay, render. This allows for convenient inline rendering and wrapping without the undesired remounting explained above. Instead of having a new React element created for you using the component prop, which is what you did yesterday, right? Use the component prop. You can pass in a function to be called when the location matches. The render prop receives all the same route props as the component render prop. So if you use component, the thing does still receive some props, right? We just can't explicitly set them. It receives all those router props like location and all that stuff. So if you use render, it still does. But since you're specifying the props yourselves, it passes in as an argument to your little arrow function there. And so then you have to explicitly pass it on to the component that you're rendering. So note form being the thing that we're rendering, if we want it to receive location and all that stuff, we have to make sure that this thing that gets passed into our arrow function, we also pass on. Make sense? But main is pretty simple. It renders thing list, which works, or note list, which works exactly like you think it does. And then note form, which uses this this WYSIWYG editor that honestly is a tad complicated. Let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break.